Thank you for joining Tyler, Duncan, Realty Partners for our latest podcast. I'm here with my colleague, Charles Shapiro, and I'm Chad Tyler. In our last podcast for you in November, we gave you an update on the Denver commercial real estate market and what opportunities that presented for you. So today, as we just entered January of 2024, we thought it would be helpful to give you our forecast for the commercial real estate market for the two markets that we're focused on. That includes Washington, D.C. and the extended Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and also Denver and its extended metropolitan area. And we're going to focus on the office sector and also the industrial sector. So we know that many of our viewers are very market savvy. However, we feel that our day-to-day focus and involvement in the industry will help yield some insights that might shape your decision-making in 2024. So with that, Charles, before we get into the nuts and bolts, I have a very serious question for you, which is, how do commercial real estate brokers stay cool in this complicated market?
I don't know, Chad. How do they?
Charles, they always have good air conditioning, and they have a great sense of humor for market fluctuations. Now, to get more serious, Charles, as we're looking at 2024, what's one macroeconomic factor that comes to mind that you see shaping commercial real estate in 2024?
Well, when we last had our last podcast, we talked about interest rates. And we're seeing it now. When you have buildings that are refinancing, they're having problems because the value of their properties are going down and their interest rates are going up. So when they're going into a refinance situation, sometimes they can't make money. And what that might end up being is them turning the keys back into the bank, or the banks having to foreclose on their properties. This is a real challenge going into 2024. But the good news is that the impact will be minor, not minor, I'm not gonna say minor, but it's going to go down towards the end of the year, because we think interest rates are going to peak and then go down a little bit. And then there'll be some certainty in the market about where interest rates are. So Chad, what comes to mind for you?
Well, stemming from the increases with interest rates, we're definitely seeing a tightened credit market and tighter loan standards for all of those that are active in the commercial real estate sector. So that means less liquidity to the marketplace. Traditional banks specifically got caught in a bit of a liquidity gap with the rise in interest rates. So they're less active in the markets. And particularly for any lenders that have a lot of office exposure, they're even more inclined to stay away from the commercial real estate market. And again, particularly office. So less liquidity to the industry is going to mean less transaction volume overall, and particularly in the office sector. Charles, how about workforce trends?
Well, here in downtown Denver, we saw the workforce, the percentage of the workforce coming back to the office at 60%, and have been gradually going up, but it seems to have plateaued at 60%. So we do expect the number of people coming back to the office to increase, but we just don't know when or by how much. So time will tell. The biggest challenge with all of this is that it just creates a huge amount of uncertainty in the office market. So, because of this, we expect to see companies move some of their offices to the suburbs, where they'll be closer to people, that when they do have to come to the office, they can, and do it a little bit less expensively. But this whole trend is going to continue, and it's going to be a part of the long-term shape of the marketplace. So what about e-commerce? Where do you see that going?
So, e-commerce is definitely playing an important factor within the industry. As many of us know, e-commerce has been very strong the last few years, and it's continued to expect it to be so going forward. And that's particularly helped the industrial market. We've had great metrics for the industrial market, both nationwide, also Denver and Washington, D.C. for the last several years. And a lot of that is a result of continued growth in e-commerce. And while we're not going to talk about it today, specifically as it relates to the retail sector, there was the expectation that e-commerce would really have an adverse impact on the retail property sector. However, we've really not seen that borne out to any significant degree, which is positive. And we'll talk more about retail in future podcasts. So, Charles, with that, why don't we switch gears a bit and let's talk about some forecasts for specific property types for the Denver market. And let's talk about the, why don't you start us off with the office sector for Denver?
So let's go back to what we saw in 2023 and how this relates to what we think is going to happen in 2024. We talked about the high interest rates, the uncertainty in financing cost levels. So we expect buyers here and probably across the country to take a wait and see attitude towards new investments because their costs are going up. We don't see a major recession happening. There's nothing out there that says that we're going to be having a real problem in that area. Vacancy rates are going to stay high at 16.2%. Denver has one of the highest vacancy rates in the country, up there with Washington, D.C., which are very similar markets when it comes to looking at what's going on. Employment and job growth. Unemployment did go up in Denver, but it went from 2.8% to 3.4%. We're still at full employment here in Denver, so we think that things are going to stay really strong in the employment side. As I said earlier, employment, office attendance jumped to 60% of the pre-COVID levels. And where we're seeing most of this is in the high-tech level. High-tech people, programmers, they can work from home. So they've adopted the work from home arrangement, and you're seeing them take a lot smaller spaces, which is the last thing that we saw in 2023 is that we saw a lot of companies taking smaller spaces. And when there was, leasing done, it was in the newer buildings. That was interesting. You had 3.3 million square feet of negative absorption in buildings built before 2020 and 450,000 square feet of positive absorption in buildings built after 2023. So here's what we see happening in 2024. Right now, Denver has 4.4 million square feet of office under construction. And so you can see that in the blue lines on the graph that there's a lot that's going to come on the market. This is going to push vacancies up when the buildings deliver because they're not going to deliver leased up. We also think that we're going to see some older buildings repurposed to multifamily properties. Right now in Denver, there are 16 office buildings that are being looked at to switch from office to multifamily. We expect vacancy rates to continue to spike. This is a long-term problem in the office market. We think that we're going to see vacancies go up to 18 to 20% in the next year and probably take a few years to level off. Now, with vacancies going up, what we just saw was that rent growth is likely to head into negative territory until vacancies stabilize. So you can see on the graph here that we think that that the rent growth could go to -2 to -4% in 2024 before it starts back up, but not even get to at zero until possibly 2026 or 2027. We don't know about that, but we do know this year it's going to be a tough year. Also, with employees not anxious to take on the commuting and parking costs associated with coming to downtown offices, as we said earlier, we expect more companies to move to the suburbs, and those companies that are staying in the city are getting newer, more modern office building with health clubs, better food, and other amenities that make being in the office cool and fun. And that's what they're really trying to do, is they're really selling being in downtown to the employees. What we also see, and Chad knows this very well being a landlord back in Maryland, that when there are challenges in the marketplace, companies that were in Class B buildings move to Class A buildings. They're moving to higher quality buildings because lease rates are lower, they can get better deals. We're also going to see, in our opinion, larger companies taking on smaller spaces. All the things we just talked about. So a company has 80,000 square feet and they're looking for new space. They might look for 50,000 square feet or 40,000 square feet. And finally, as we said earlier, with higher interest rates occurring in the marketplace, expect that, especially in the office side, a lot of buyers are going to stay on the side waiting for real deals to happen. They're going to look for buildings that are in crisis that they could buy at a low cost. So this whole process could take a couple of years to weed its way through. So, Chad, before you go into the office DC market, tell me, do you see some similarities between DC and Denver? Because for me, they seem to be reacting very similarly.
Yeah, it's interesting, Charles, and to our listeners, the Washington, D.C. market is very similar to the Denver market. So, in the Washington, D.C. market, as we're beginning here in January of 2024, we're seeing a vacancy rate of 16.4%, which is actually the same exact vacancy rate in Denver. In addition to that, we're seeing a 20% availability rate of space per lease. So that means that some of the space that's on the market is technically occupied, but overall 16.4% is vacant. So as we're looking forward to through 2024, unfortunately, we're expecting that vacancy rate to climb even higher in likely the range of like 3 to 4%. Leasing activity in 2023 was pretty muted. And as we're entering into 2024, there's still very little momentum with leasing activity. So we're not expecting any tick up there. Also, looking at sales activity with office properties in the Washington, D.C. and extended metropolitan area, transaction volume year over year from 2023 over 2022 was down by about 40%. So we're expecting similar sluggish sales overall throughout 2024. Also, in terms of the value decrease from the peak of around 2021 with office properties, you're looking at the average value of office properties in terms of the sales that occurred. We saw a 20% decline over 2023 and part of 2022. As we're looking forward through 2024, we're expecting, unfortunately, perhaps similar declines of potentially up to 20%. So as Charles indicated, like Denver, Washington, D.C. is going to continue to be a challenging market for office building owners. And while that's a challenge and a struggle, there are opportunities for buyers that are looking for distressed properties, and particularly office properties. So there will be the opportunity to buy at deep discounts, focused on repositioning those properties, some to multifamily, some to data centers possibly, some to public storage as well. In addition to that, the silver lining and the upside, as Charles alluded to, for tenants is that it's an exceptional opportunity for tenants to renegotiate their leases, get great concessions, and there is a flight to quality. The Class A office buildings, are leasing up considerably better than Class B and C properties. So there are some opportunities despite the challenges in the office market. So Charles, why don't we switch gears? Why don't you talk about the Denver industrial market?
Well, after going through the office market, we're feeling a little bit depressed because it really is a challenge. The industrial market is way different. It has 10 years of hyper growth. And so in 2023, we went from hyper growth to sort of a cooling off period, not a negative one. I mean, because of slower home buying, people were buying fewer materials. So the growth in office and warehouse went down at the same time. So, in 2023, large bay warehouses, the big warehouses had a down year, and small bay warehouses held up really, really well. And the reason is that when you see people buying less lumber and less, tubing and all the sorts of products that are used for building homes, that went down a little bit. But this is a temporary situation. We also saw that rent growth slowed a little bit and went below the national average, which Denver's market rent growth has been just exploding. So what do we see for 2024? Vacancies will grow a bit because we still have a lot of property under construction. So we expect that vacancies, which are about 7.5%, might go to 8.5%. They're going to tick up, and then they're going to come back down in the next couple of years as the space hitting the market gets absorbed. With the new supply hitting the market, expect rent growth to slow. So when we say rent growth slowing, it's been sitting here in Denver at about 8%, and now it's about 6%. And it may go down to 3 or 4%, which is still fairly healthy. But when you're expecting what we had in the past, which is really, really powerful rent growth, look at the 6% rent growth we had in 2018-19. It was really, this lower rent growth is still going to be powerful as you compare it to other types of properties. Any downturn in the market, as I've said earlier, we think is going to be short term. The fundamentals are stable and demand remains strong. We expect sales prices will stabilize, maybe go down a touch because of the high interest rates, but you're not going to see people waiting around for big bargains. The big bargains are not going to be there. But sales volume will likely go up from the 2023 levels, which were really low because of the high interest rates. But they're not going to go up by too much until we see the interest rates get to a point of stabilization, which we expect to see this year. Chad, what about the Washington, D.C. area industrial market? What do you see there?
Yeah, so with Washington, D.C. and the extended metropolitan area, we've had some mixed signals both locally and nationally in terms of indications of a possible recession. So that's kind of weighed on the market a little bit. But to your point, Charles, it's been very modest. So looking at Washington, D.C., specifically in the industrial sector, so in mid-year 2023, we hit a 20-year low vacancy rate of 3.8%. And as we sit here in January of 2024, that vacancy rate stands at 4.8%, still very low and positive by historical standards. But a little bit different than the Denver market. The Washington, D.C. market and extended metropolitan area is pretty supply constrained. We have less availability of industrial land. So as a result of that, we had record high rental rates in 2023 for the industrial sector. So looking into 2024 throughout the entire year, we're not expecting those rates to increase more, particularly given a large amount of supplies. As you indicated with Denver, it's possible those rates could tick down a little bit or remain flat, but they're still very high by historical standards. So one particular segment of the industrial market that has been very important has been data centers. There's been a lot of data centers built and a lot under construction right now, and that's been a very positive contributor to the industrial sector in the Washington, D.C. and extended area. So right now, we've got 8.8 million square feet of new industrial product under construction, Washington, D.C. metro-wide. And by historical standards, that's a lot. However, about 50% of that is pre-leased, a good portion of which is to data centers. So overall, the Washington, D.C. industrial market remains very healthy, although looking throughout 2024, it will lag a little bit in terms of performance compared to 2023. So Charles, before I wrap it up with some summary points, anything else you want to add as far as the Washington, D.C. industrial market? Or
well, we saw the similarities between the Denver and Washington, D.C. office markets. The industrial markets are very different, whereas the Amazons and the logistics companies really push this market. And before that, the marijuana companies. And it seems like in DC, it really is these data centers that are more technologically sophisticated. And if there were a downturn in that market, they might have a more difficult time being repurposed. But they seem like to be very, very different markets, but both performing very well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in summary, with both Washington, D.C. and the Denver market, we'll continue to see a struggling office market. And the office market will certainly be the worst performing sector of all the different property sectors. However, as indicated, this will present some opportunities for buyers looking for distressed properties, also for tenants that are looking to renegotiate their leases or move to better space. But in addition to that, looking at the industrial sector will remain very healthy. While it will lag the 2023 numbers in terms of all the metrics, it will still remain a very healthy market, both for Denver, Washington, D.C., and nationwide overall. While we're not going to talk about it today, the retail property sector is likely to be the best performing both for Washington, D.C. and Denver, and perhaps nationally. We'll talk more about that in future podcasts. We will also talk more about the hospitality and multifamily sector in future podcasts. And we hope you found this information to be helpful as you consider commercial real estate opportunities in 2024. If we can be of further service to you, of further help, please contact us at the contact information shown on your screen. All the best. All right, Anthony.